Navigator, Part 2, The Jump Wars. The white hulls of the remaining shuttles were ordered in neat rows within the hangar, lit by the flashes of the warning lights. But I was not alone in that cold steel room. The crimson pulse illuminated a creature from the destroyer, a creature crouching over the mutilated body of a dead shriek bull. The creature was bipedal, compact, durable. Ballistic armor bruised with the carbon buildup of old energy weapon burns and new scores from shriek talons. Exoskeleton that reinforced its organic bones with durasteel rods along its limbs. Electro-reactive polymers that articulated the synthetic limbs as naturally as the biological ones when it stood. Void dark helmet that angled toward me in a basilisk stare. The broken horns of a shriek warrior stamped on its armored chest in red. The severed horns of the dead shriek held at its side in a gauntleted hand. Behind it was a predator, some kind of carnivore that stood on 4 limbs, head lowered and hackles raised. The beast was almost as tall as the Terran and twice as long. Heavy muscles rippled under its furred hide as it shifted to fix me with glinting eyes. A rumbling growl spilled from between the fangs of its long snout. I froze, trembling on atrophied limbs. The creature, the Terran, was not alone. 2 more were to my right, one standing in the open, the other next to a massive tool chest. The one raised a rifle to its shoulder, the other lunged forward, and I heard the faintest whine of straining servos as the tool chest crashed onto its side, the tools scattering across the deck, creating shelter for both of them to cover me with their rifles. The chest must have been 200 kilograms. I raised my arms, the universal appeal for mercy, shivering in the cold, malnourished, dressed only in a tattered shift. The Terran spoke on inter-helmet comms. I could tell by the way its head angled. A sharp motion caused the beast to slink back. A moment's hesitation and both rifles lowered. It stepped from the shriek's corpse, limping. I could see the mangled leg, held together more by the exo and the armor than flesh and bone. Red blood spattered the deck. Red like my own, dripping down my back and side. Just 3 steps closer. Then the soldier tapped one hand on the outside of the opposite arm. A voice spoke from the helmet, growling through low-quality speakers and stripped of all emotion by a translator. It spoke Shrike, the guttural words harsh against my eardrums. "We must free the slaves or be ourselves subdued." They were gone, and I was alone with a shriek corpse. I tried to go back for Kel, the arduous journey stressing my already exhausted system. But when I got there, the mule was gone, the docking bay empty. So I made the trip a 3rd time, this time through the icy white of flame-retardant foam as the sensors tripped, falling twice and passing a mob of slaves that parted around me like a wave, going the opposite direction, away from the fire. The hangar was choked with smoke when I finally crawled through the blast doors. Coughing, I entered one of the shuttles and linked the nerva-thread into the ports at the top of my spine. The ship threw up complaints from the Atmos scrubbers about the pollution and warnings about launch sequences. But with a twitch of my chin, I dismissed them. If piloting an ore mule is like slogging through a swamp, a shuttle is like a draft horse. Slow and methodical, dependable, constructed for reliability. Nervothread makes piloting much more intuitive, which is fortunate because I wouldn't have been able to fly it otherwise. A shuttle is a far cry from a mule, and the manual controls would have remained undecipherable. More shuttles detached from launch pads around the station. Even some mules made a go of it, all keeping a wide berth around the destroyer's void space. Not enough, barely any, but some. None more came from my hangar as it began to burn. And then the destroyer was not, vanishing into hyperspace with a bloom of obsidian and writhing purple. I filtered through previous trajectories in the navigation computer and selected one that matched where I'd seen shriek ships arrive during my captivity. I kept the acceleration set at a manageable level those first few hours. About 2 things I was in total system shock. 1, that warship had jumped. I had witnessed the single greatest technological advancement in intergalactic history. No particular arrangement of physics, old as the galaxies themselves, that formed a jump point, where it was exclusively possible to open a wormhole. No relay station constructed around that jump point, and the connected jump point to ensure the hyperlane was transversed safely. This ship had jumped, the closest to omnipresence our 3 dimensions will ever be. 2. Those creatures had fired lethal weapons within a pressurized station, a violation of a dozen intergalactic treaties and commensurate to an immediate declaration of war. miss a shot and cause explosive decompression, or the atmo pumps to fail. Even I could name a dozen tragedies that killed everyone on board without the use of projectile weapons. I slept. When I awoke, I raided foodstuffs from some storage lockers, scarfing them as quickly as I could swallow. The first time I'd eaten anything other than protein blocks and vitamin pills since my homeworld. Then, I pushed the virtual throttle forward, increasing the acceleration to 4 or 5 times my homeworld's gravity. All I thought I could withstand for the duration. It was built by the Shriek, and I barely strained the drive engines on the sublight journey. My memories of the next 2 rotations are faded, corrupted like a damaged data drive. I bartered the Shrike shuttle for an unsanctioned trip through a relay station to Calestis Hub. It was a wretched hive of scum and villainy, a hyperlane hub that bottlenecked passage to 100,000 square light-years of edge of the black void space. Lawless, unsettled territory inhabited by deep-range mining crews, explorers more insane than sane, and creatures that had a vested interest in remaining hidden from the core worlds. I remember mostly being hungry as I trawled the drug dens and gambling clubs, searching through the brothels and fighting pits for my sisters, ducking away from peacekeeper garrisons more corrupt than the pirates and smugglers making their lives in the baronies, millions of kilometers from the settled worlds. I lied, cheated, and fought my way through the underbelly, arriving at the same answer every time. Very don't survive here. I became hard, like callus over raw skin. I learned how to use weapons, how to evade, how to forge documentation and identification. I became numb, brain-dead, apathetic like Kel had been, driven on instinct instead of thought, a biological computer processing input and output without emotion. Until that last night on the hub, I fired a bolt bouncer through the torso of a Disready slaver when she laid a hand on me. Purely emotion. Fear so intense I could taste it in the filtered atmo. The crime was a death sentence. I ran, burning the last of my credits to buy docs and IDs to get me through another half-dozen relay stations to the outer rim, selling my body to eat and worse. This life had overtuned my senses like raw nerves, so I noticed the whispers quickly, almost as soon as the stories drifted through from deep mining crews, long-range exploration probes, and pirate cartels. Stories of a secret war. A war waged on the edge of the black, where the dwindling echoes of torpedo and energy cannon were not permitted to stray into the outer rim until it was already finished. And when this war was finished, a civilization was gone. Not driven back, not defeated, gone. Snuffed like a sputtering candle in the infinite darkness of the void. The outskirts of the settled galaxies heard the stories and noticed the turbulence under the calm surface. Deep mining crews vanishing without a distress beacon. Smugglers found drifting with untouched cargo. Missing trajectory reports and communication terminals rerouting comm signals because a relay station had gone dark. Pirate boardings that left valuable cargo untouched and the data drives scrubbed. Warn them? Who would believe me? I hadn't even heard the word Terran at that point. No one had. Just stories from creatures too long in the deep. Until they weren't just stories, and they were reports of monsters awoken from beyond the black. Monsters that had eradicated Shrike civilization and now hunted the remnant wherever they fled. Monsters that called themselves Terran. The Corps didn't notice. There was trade, politics, science, art, ultra-rich corpo barons and distant oligarchies self-consumed with their own lives, unable to look past their homeworlds to the outer rim, to notice the silence like drifting fog, to notice relentless hunters tracking across the stars, any shriek who had somehow slipped from what had been awoken at the edge of the black, to notice the insidious dead space creeping ever closer toward the settled worlds. So I played the last card in my hand. Nervo Thread cyberware bartered for a mess of untraceable credits dumped into my virtual wallet. Getaway pilot for a cartel hit using a surplus Shrike gunship. My link-ups were barely compatible with military tech, but it was enough to only take a few practice runs before I could cover the rest with manual controls. The Nervothread gave me enough of an edge to be worth the money. When it was done, I told them to scrap the ship. Those of us on the outer rim, in the outskirts, in the baronies, we knew what was coming. The hunters were merciless, inexorable as the maw of a black hole. Relentless living weapons that had but one directive. A directive to destroy Shrike by any means necessary, indifferent to collateral damage of both metal and flesh. There was another war coming, because it was only a matter of time before a Terran hunter inflicted that collateral damage upon something that belonged to the Corps. The cartel payout was more than enough to get my own ship. I didn't even consider something Shrike, despite my augmentations. I knew that would be akin to painting targeting lasers on my chest. An Outrider-class sloop retrofitted with a jump drive suited my needs, and I slingshot my way through the relay stations unnoticed beyond routine queries. I exited that final relay station. 400,000 kilometers in the distant void, my homeworld shone blue and green. My pistol was aimed on an outstretched arm when he opened the door to the building I used to call home. It was stronger now, muscled, tattooed, scarred with the story of these past 9 years in my homeworld's time. None now remembered me, or would recognize me if they did. I had lived beyond this world, and I now saw my species for what we were. Weak, subservient, living in wretched hovels on the scraps of tech that fell, broken, from the relay station to our surface. It disgusted me. The result of our assimilation into the greater collective of sapient species. The same as all species left to rot on the outskirts, isolated from convenient jump points. Someone once called pistols the great equalizer, and we still used bows. My fingers tensed on the trigger, squeezing the mechanism ever closer to that fatal click. But the Varian who opened the door was not my father. He had died of sickness years ago. The revelation drained my form of rage and fear and grief. Purposeless. Empty. Just a biological computer processing input and output, watching a powerful Disretti slaving consortium fill the vacuum left by the Shriek. Armed mercenaries herding my species into slave ships, passing through the same relay station as the pleasure yachts traveling to and from the personal resorts of the ultra-wealthy. Revulsion so strong I could taste it. They didn't care or didn't know, or they took a cut of the action. Then that video exploded across the networks. A Shriek civilian transport ship that bumped into a mining probe on the outer rim. Lawless, contested void space claimed by one syndicate and 2 lunar confederacies. An unarmed, unshielded cruise liner with heat-burned drive engines and spent fuel cells, scraps of expired rations, and a hole in the side that vented 3 decks, punched there at close range by a mass driver. No energy weapons, too civilized. The interior of that transport was ripped apart with kinetics, and the Shrike aboard weren't just slaughtered, they were hurt, tortured. Civilians, females, young. The males were crucified. The Corps finally took notice. Then the second video feed, taken by a medical crew accelerating to the assistance of an unencrypted distress beacon broadcast by a crippled Shrike frigate. They got there just before the Terran destroyer dropped from hyperspace with a burst of purple-edged obsidian. It was a dark ship. A ship that looked like war felt. A ship that awoke suppressed emotions from my time of slavery aboard that distant moon. He rounds bored through the frigate's weakened hull and transformed the ship to molten slag. One of the escort cruisers for the medical convoy managed a plasma cannon shot. It dissipated in blue ripples across the dreadnought's shields. Thrusters fired, and the dreadnought turned with malevolent intent to bring its mass drivers to bear on the cruiser. Then harpoons lashed out like a multitude of snakes. That's when the feed cut, but I heard the Terran shock troopers ripped the medical ships apart searching for more Shriek, the collateral damage we'd been waiting for in the outer rim. Then eyewitness accounts of the jump away. The catastrophic revelation that a theoretical problem had been solved incited mass panic, a species that could jump. Terran ships did not depend upon FTL jump points or relay stations. They jumped. From anywhere to anywhere. Terran ships could jump. Every strategic position among the stars was rendered invalid. FTL lane fortifications, orbital turret emplacements, battleship dry docks, munitions depots, all superfluous against an enemy that could jump. The entirety of modern ship-to-ship and ship-to-surface combat doctrine meaningless. Mass panic. Understatement. Mass hysteria. I had ensured my Outrider was equipped with an enhanced sensor package, so I remained as well informed as everyone else outside of the various military commands. It wasn't much, really. It's only now that I can really fill in the blanks. Terra's reach was long indeed, fingers scrabbling through the stars for any creature that had escaped the First Contact War. Except those scrabbling fingers had caused collateral damage, and a chain reaction of treaties and alliances and mutual defense agreements quickly forced the galaxies into united conflict. The Corps lashed out in panic, striking advanced stations and carrier docks with the full strength of its available fleets, erasing the presence of Terran from within the settled worlds, driving them again to their homeworld on the edge of the black. But when the Terran hit back, their armored hulls and mass drivers hit hard. Military doctrine states that at the onset of any conflict, the first priority is to secure the FTL lanes in order to establish operating bases. But there are no battle lines against a species that can jump. No defensible positions. The war was everywhere and nowhere. The war was wherever Terra deigned it to be. Core, the outskirts, outer rim, the baronies. The battlefront was the entirety of the void. The United Galaxies against one system. The war was a war of unnatural terror. It was a war fought entirely on Terra's terms. Jump, and a Terran destroyer dropped from hyperspace with the same obsidian purple that announced the warping of reality. Jump! And the wreckage and ruin of a fleeing Shrike racing yacht, or a military fueling station, or a cartel gunship were drifting slag and cerulean flares of burning atmo. Jump! Nothing but dead space where the destroyer had been. Jump! Torpedoes burning hard for an unsuspecting troop transport. Jump! Federation factory obliterated by orbital bombardment. Jump! 1,500-kilogram depleted uranium slug accelerated through the hull of a battleship. Jump! Torpedo. Jump! Slug. Jump! He round. Jump, jump, jump. A military convoy passing through the space between FTL lanes would be ambushed by the combined firepower of an entire Terran destroyer command dropped out of hyperspace at close range. Terran carriers would skip past orbital defenses, downshifting to release their payloads of heavy bombers into the stratosphere, to turn the sky over planetary dry docks dark with saturation bombing. Forces deployed against Terran navies were baited into a cat-and-mouse game. Jump after jump taunting just out of range, until frustration and impatience got the better of inexperienced recruits, and they strayed too far from the safety of the fold, where the predators circled invisibly, hidden behind layer after layer of hyperspace, waiting for the slaughter. The consolidated might of the core was worthless. Like I said, blanks filled in after the fact. Out in the cluster, reports were cycles out of date and garbled by second- or third-hand accounts. Life, such as it was, remained life. Sure, many of the opulent citizens abandoned their private homes to return to what they thought was the safety of the core, and there was a brief period of unrest when the Desredi Consortium made a power play and hijacked the relay station to effectively control the entire void space. I watched a mansion pillaged and burned as they enslaved one of the wealthy families that remained, watched through magnified lenses as those spoiled, soft magnates were thrown into a cargo hauler. Life remained life. A report came through the relay station that a great battle had been fought somewhere called the Sol system, that the United Confederation Navy had for the first time entered Terran void space and decisively defeated a Terran fleet, a turning point in the war. But a second report followed days later. It detailed a retaliatory jump into the very center of the core, where behemoths with bellies of incendiary bombs had struck residential megablocks, napalm on a high oxyworld. It was then that the United Galaxies were subjected to what would come to be called the Terran Doctrine, a concept of total war realized by a species with singular fanatical purpose. War at the hand of sleeping monsters awoken by the shriek during the First Contact War. Awoken like an elder god's vengeance, primal savagery and inexorable fury, blood and iron, durasteel and depleted uranium. Not since the Shrike Crusades had carnage been industrialized on this awesome scale. The United Galaxies were embroiled in a total war against a species that could jump. I lingered, hidden and unbothered, squatting in an abandoned lodge some Atlian politician wasn't using. Let the galaxies burn. These Terran, these monsters from the edge of the black, retribution for the sins of the uncaring core. The night I heard of the contagion bombs, I celebrated with the politicians' alcohol reserves,